Up next is Jeff Maki.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Maki. I have my own consultancy, Public Works Office, and I am also working with the good folks at the Tasker Center on technology delivery and QA/QC reports, which is what I'm going to focus on in this session. So I certainly want to give a special shout out to all the folks at the Tasker Center who have worked with me on this project. Ryan, who's sitting here in the front, especially, and Anat, and many of the others at the center. This is certainly not all my work. I'm more the delivery vehicle. So just to recap, status of OS Connect, I think you heard from Anat, obviously, what OS Connect is in its current state. But by the numbers, I've got a chart here that just focuses on the data elements, 593,000 sidewalks, 670,000 crossings across the entire state of Washington. And all this data is available for you to download and use in your own work today, which is super exciting. It's open, it's accessible, and the thing that I want to emphasize is that it's connected, which is what we're going to talk about more in a minute, the value of connected data and how to evaluate connectivity. It's connected so you can do network-based analysis. So I think this is probably old news for most in the room, but what network-based accessibility analysis enables, obviously, the kind of historical method, the low-tech solution is doing as the crow flies. You draw a line that is, 100 meters around a point and say anything within that circle is accessible. The next level up, of course, being street-based analysis focused on road infrastructure. And then, as you've heard many folks before me kind of highlight, the next level, especially the gentleman from UW, Andrew, or I believe it was, or Andy, the next level is taking, sidewalk data and layering that on top of the street, or using that as a street network that's, in parallel to the roads, and tagging that with accessibility data. And that allows us to develop and route personalized mobility profiles that can include preferences like slope. It can include curb cuts and other accessibility features, ramps, et cetera, et cetera. Funny story aside, I had a moment where I'm visiting from Philadelphia. I love your fair city, Seattle. And I'm staying downtown, and I went downtown and I noticed how sloped everything was. And I'm like, of course, this is why, no other place could be the place where, this type of data is so top of mind for folks when, you would definitely not get up that hill in a manual wheelchair. So, it's exciting to kind of see the place that was the genesis of this, to the earlier question of why is Washington ground zero. So goals for this session, and I want to try to keep this, it's going to be hard because I'm a bit of a talker, but I want to try to keep this to 20, 25 minutes because I actually want to ask you a bunch of questions about some work that we have in progress and that we have in flight, and I would love to get your feedback on. But goals for this session are, I want to show you how to find what we call a jurisdictional PAC, or kind of QA/QC report in some other terms. Understand basic steps to assess data suitability for your use. Understand a minimal use workflow, and then think about common user stories and trying to map those to steps for you to evaluate whether the data is sufficient for that use. So the first step, and this part I'm going to show on screen, you're welcome to follow along on your device if you want, but honestly, you can also just watch on the screen. I think it's captured pretty well here on the slides. But the first step is to go to osconnectviewer.tdi.us. I do have a QR code up there, but you'll also see the screen here on the slide deck. And this basically presents a map of the sidewalk network grid. You can see that the features are color-coded by type. And then there's a search box, which you'll see in the upper right-hand. And in that box, you can type the jurisdiction that you're looking for. You'll see that I'll pull up Bellevue in a minute. The viewer, when you type the jurisdiction you're looking for, this box will pop up with the jurisdiction highlighted, and you'll see a link inside that bubble that says View Report, and that is the jurisdictional PAC with the quality report that we'll be discussing. I'll just kind of give you, not to be like this is a bit of a spoiler, but not to make you wait. You will get something that looks like this. And again, this is a work in progress. You'll see in terms of like formatting and presentation, but you'll see that there's a PDF version of it linked on the data viewer. There's also an interactive version that we're iterating on that allows you to zoom the maps and kind of zoom into areas of interest. Some of this data is quite large, so that's why sometimes on mobile it's a little funky, but on desktops it performs better right now. We're going to work on both those things. But so the kind of jurisdictional pack is designed in general to answer the question, is the data good enough for my needs? And there's kind of three things that we think about when we ask that question. The first is tag completeness, which is, if important attributes are missing, things like, again, as I mentioned earlier, curb ramps, slope, crossing details. The data might look complete on the map in terms of you've got, lines throughout the whole geographic area, but if you actually try to route with, preferences that might include a curb ramp, you might not get very far before the system's like, hey, you can't go any further. And obviously then the question is the infrastructure not there or is the data just not complete? The next is a kind of intersection quality map. Are quality problems isolated in specific neighborhoods? Are those data gaps? Are they infrastructure gaps again? And then the third is about the distribution of the values. So obviously, in statistics, the famous saying, how to lie with statistics, or whatever that saying goes, means you can, have a lot of values on one side and very few on the other side, and the mean can still be skewed high. That's why we kind of look at a distribution to see, are the values, fairly evenly distributed, representing a, or excuse me, the opposite. Is low quality data uncommon? Basically, is most of the data or the intersection metrics, are they kind of on the higher side, representing that that data is of higher quality? And it's important to note that the QA/QC report is a screening tool. It's certainly not designed to replace or substitute for field verification for certain use cases. It's still going to be important, obviously, to go validate data in the field, and you've sort of heard about Scout Route and other strategies that the TCAT tool set kind of enables for that. So also when you pop open the QA/QC report, you'll see reference to a kind of acronym IXN quality, intersection quality, or a TRA score, traversability score. What is that? So in short, it's a measure of data quality, and it ranges from 0 to 1. Higher's better. The kind of key takeaway, there's a reference to an academic paper written by the folks at the Tasker Center and Knott and crew about the methodology and the kind of statistical methodology behind it. But I think the key takeaway is that local routability is correlated with global routability. So basically, if you can measure local routability in a bunch of places kind of within a data set, and you derive an average or again a distribution of those values, you can kind of make an inference about what the quality of the data would be as a whole. And so that's kind of a unique. It's a unique strategy in the sense that it doesn't rely on just counting elements and saying that more elements is better. It sort of brings into the conversation connectedness, which is critically important when you actually want to route over this network and kind of understand how the pieces of the network interact together rather than just like have they been drawn on the map. And so this is kind of where I'll go a little bit back and forth between the report and the slide deck, but the report is designed to focus around 6 questions. And this is the part that we're iterating on that I would, in particular, I mean, I'd love your feedback on all of it, but in particular this section, which is kind of 6 questions that walk one through evaluating the quality of the data and the suitability for use cases. And so I've got a slide about each one. You'll have to apologize for I think I enlarged the font at the last minute because it was a little small, so the formatting might be a little off in places. But the first question is, what is Bellevue's or any data sets, what's in that data set and how complete is the inventory? And so kind of going back over to my report, and again, this is what you'll see at OS Connect if you go to that little bubble and click on that link and find your own jurisdiction. How complete is the data set and what's in it? There's this summary table on section 2.1, and then 2.2, there's kind of a count of elements within the data sets, sidewalk, crossing, curbs, points of interest, and then this completeness table that kind of has the feature types, the feature layer types and total count and completeness against this required tag set here. So the first kind of question that you can ask with that sort of material from the QA/QC report is, what's in the data set? How complete is it? And the things that we would look at are that report summary table, which is here at the top, the count, which is kind of this section here. And the kind of first, the point of this first question is to take like a quick 30,000 foot sanity check. You know, if you have a small jurisdiction and you see, you know, the report, I don't think it would actually kind of come across this way, but if it said, you know, there were 3 million features in there, you're like, well, that's not right. You know, kind of give it a quick sanity check and kind of make sure, you know, that, yeah, the feature count seems reasonable. There's also, as you saw, there's an area kind of number here that has a few too many significant digits. But the point being, if that doesn't kind of match your understanding or your knowledge of your own region, then obviously something may be off and you wouldn't want to proceed any further. You'd want to kind of dive into that and dig into that and understand why. So that's kind of the first question. So like very, very top level, you know, does this make sense in a kind of sanity check? The second question is, which attributes are strong versus missing? So, you know, again, kind of making a distinction between, you know, if kind of routability in the end isn't what you expect, or it's kind of poor in an area, is it a issue of missing infrastructure, or is it an issue of missing data? And so the kind of layers to look at here on the report are the completeness, which is, I'd say broadly section 3. I think section 3 as a whole is, yeah, it's kind of focused on completeness. And the kind of takeaway here is taking a look at the percentages. And, you know, I think on future iterations, we'll probably try to graph or visualize this a little bit more. But in this example, which I think is legible on the screen, you can see that, you know, footways is only 9.6% complete. Meanwhile, sidewalks is, you know, 97% complete, curbs 38%. So the kind of takeaway here is finding, you know, areas of the report where completion is low and kind of keeping that in mind is, or contextualizing other things within the report, you know, with that knowledge, knowing that, for example, if you see, you know, that the curb count is low, for example, you probably don't want to, you wouldn't want to rely on that data completely for ADA accessibility measures, for example, because, you know, a lot of the tags or a lot of the curbs don't have that tag about whether that curb cut is there or not. The third question is, where are accessibility islands and disconnected destinations? So the kind of thing we're drilling into here is whether the network has been fragmented into what we kind of think of as islands, so kind of independent sections or subgraphs, kind of like sections of the city or of the jurisdiction that aren't connected. They're connected within each other or within the island itself, but not across islands, if that makes sense. And so the kind of takeaway here is, you know, thinking about those islands as containers for POIs, what we call points of interest, or you can kind of also think about it as like amenities or common destinations. You know, Ryan and the team has kind of done a great job of, in collaboration with some of the early users of these reports, to define a set of amenities categorically that kind of represent like a basket of what a typical person might want to access. So this could be, you know, grocery, it could be medical care, transportation, things of that sort. And those points of interest are kind of used to, or are kind of mapped to these islands. And then you can kind of ask yourself, you know, like if, for example, there are 2 clusters of points of interest in Island A and Island B, and those 2 islands aren't connected together, perhaps, you know, the highest impact thing I could do in my community is to connect those 2 islands together. And so that's kind of what question 3 is designed to elicit or kind of help you conclude, which is, we kind of, you've probably noticed in the bottom there have this like done when category, but the goal would be for you to walk away from reading this report and saying, you know, I can name 2 to 3, you know, islands that I've seen that have, you know, key points of interest within them, and I can see that they're either not accessible between each other or from, you know, a certain point, and I need to dig into that more. I need to go verify whether that's a data gap, whether that's an infrastructure gap, and kind of drill into that a little bit more. Which is kind of a segue to the next question, which is question 4. How easy are intersections to cross, which kind of is measured with that traversability score that I mentioned earlier. So here, what we're doing is basically taking a look at the report in terms of this kind of like a chloropleth map with the different kind of buckets of traversability score, and then on the map. And what we want to look for are places where the traversability score is low. And we want to think about, as you can see in the green box, we want to think about why that could be. Is it missing crossings? Is it missing ramps? You know, kind of, again, thinking about the tiles as a place where people may need to get to contextualize with that points of interest data. You know, where we might want to focus our attention in terms of trying to better understand what the accessibility barriers are. And then questions 5 and 6 are kind of layers on top of that, where you know, 5 takes a look at a measure of how would you refer to this? Maybe like kind of criticality. It's centrality, but the idea is that, you know, within the network and in terms of like the shortest paths within the network between 2 points, which of these edges or which of these sidewalk kind of segments are used most often? And that's what centrality helps to measure. And the idea is that, you know, here what we want to find are critical connectors, what we call critical connectors, that are basically high centrality edges, and we want to see where those might fall in kind of cells that have low traversability. And the idea would be that addressing those, this kind of starts to get to section 6. The idea is that, or question 6, the idea is that addressing those are kind of like the easy wins or the high ROI, you know, potential data improvements or infrastructure projects that one might want to think about, where basically, you know, adding another connector between islands might unlock, you know, access between, you know, 2 huge sets of points of interest, or improving the connectivity within that island might, you know, allow people to better travel between these key points of interest. And so question 6 is basically using the QA/QC report, and it's got its own list down here at the end. The kind of like top 20, we could make this top 50, it can be however many you want, but the idea being top bottleneck intersections, which are, again, are low traversability and kind of like high importance when trying to access those points of interest. And so I think I'm doing okay on time here, but you know, the kind of thing that I want to bring up next is we would love your thoughts on, you know, helping to build out the next iteration of this report. You'll see there are certain data sets on the QA/QC viewer now that have like an older report with there's like a teal kind of header to it. So there's that version of the report. We were working on this version too that you saw glimpses of here, and then there's also a version that we're thinking about that's more kind of, you know, decision support oriented, where there are these, you know, 6 questions. Maybe those 6 questions are also tied to common roles, you know, ADA coordinator, construction project manager, and trying to kind of structure or scaffold this process a little bit more in terms of interacting with the report. But we would love your thoughts and feedback on, you know, kind of how things are sitting now. Like, does the 6 steps model make sense? Does, you know, anything that I've said or shown resonate with you in your role? Would you be able to kind of understand data gaps versus infrastructure gaps with a report like this? Priority areas, how to prioritize capital projects using some of the data in here, and what things might we not be thinking about, or conversely really resonated with you and you're like, that's amazing, I'd like to see more of that, please. So we'll be taking notes, or somebody will help me with that, but we'd love to hear your thoughts. Mary, we've traded emails. Hello.
Yes, hello. I think for me, looking at the report, I've got it pulled up on here and seeing it on the screen.
Cool, yeah.
I think I'm struggling to differentiate the data gaps versus the infrastructure gaps.
Yeah.
I think that would be the #1 thing that would help in looking at a report like this, is to know clearly which metrics are referring to the data quality versus the network quality, and things like the TRA score, or like the IXN. I think being able to click on something and kind of get a definition of how that was defined or created, because probably many of us who work with data don't, you know, we love metrics and numbers, but don't necessarily want to use one that was created without knowing what went into it.
Sure, yeah, of course.
And like what exactly it's defining or describing. And so
Sure.
even now, I'm still not clear on that question of like, for that TRA score, is that describing the data itself or the network, like through
Yeah, the
real physical
characteristics of the network.
characteristics?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And so like reading the like title of this report, it's like OS Connect Data QA/QC plus connectivity hotspot analysis. If there's a way to have that be 2 separate reports, that would be fantastic, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, that's great feedback, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. That was really helpful. I understand this report a lot better than I used to. But I think I need, and maybe this is similar to Mary's comment, but more basic. I don't understand these maps. I need sort of, kind of a rudimentary explanation of what these shapes mean.
Yeah.
Because they don't relate to a roadway network.
Sure.
And so I'm confused.
Sure, Yeah, the shapes that you see on the screen are more a product of the way that the traversability score is calculated, but yeah, that's totally fair. To contextualize the results like more within a familiar kind of topology of a network that people have seen before on their screen. Yeah, okay, that's great, yep.
So our unit of measure is an intersection because we didn't want to rely on population data or census tract data. So the atomic unit is intersections. These are also the way we prioritize different projects because that provides people with an assessment of like, oh, these are the 20 topmost priorities as far as intersections to look for, as far as where there's low connectivity for pedestrians, but high connectivity as far as the network depends on this. There are many places of interest that connect either through this particular intersection or from and to it. And so that's what was trying to be conveyed. Now, so that's starting from the unit of measure. So each one of those different colored areas with outlines are an intersection alongside with half the sidewalk that comes to that intersection. The next,
Where 2 lines intersect on this map is a physical location
can you move away from waterways?
Sure. Where an intersection exists.
So the centroid of every one of these polygons is centered on an intersection of roads. If you zoom in, you could see that a little bit better. So zoom in, please. Yeah. We can increase, I think the contrast looks a little bit better on screen, but we can increase the screen.
And while we're doing that, I think that in the so what, we're using lat lon, but I think it would really help if it was a feature name, right?
Yeah, that would be lovely.
It was like
So presently we don't have the connected roads and sidewalks, but that is something that Thomas is going to talk about next. So we'll soon be able to provide the intersection name as well as, what the centroid is. So then we start looking at points of interest based on some amenity list, actually based on King County Metro's guide to services and points of interest for folks. And we map those. And when we talk about accessibility islands, just to, not to correct you, just to amend what you said, we're trying to understand which subgraphs will convey people through a host of points of interest and which ones are disconnected from each other. So to Taryn's question, when we are asking where to prioritize, a lot of the time we try to assess, are there clusters of points of interest that are potentially disconnected across those 2 different clusters? An example that I recently gave, I used to have somebody who was working for me and got stuck on an accessibility island in Fremont. Why? Because paratransit dropped her off there. She was hanging out with friends, was unable to access paratransit on the way out. And then as we see a lot of different communities are getting gentrified, so their sidewalk segments and networks are broadening, and they are accommodating folks. The infrastructure is built up to the point where they're pushing against where that gentrifying area ends. And so this is kind of the disconnectivity between Ballard and Fremont, for instance, because there's a stretch there of roads that have not yet been, exposed to build out.
On this map, can you explain to me what these shapes mean?
Yeah. So
This is the POI map.
okay, so that's just the POI map. That just means within these sidewalk networks, the shapes that are in a yellow background are trying to capture what are the points of interest that are actually continuously connected to each other via a supportive pedestrian infrastructure. It's just the extent of the graph that is connected. So as we see, you see a little rhomboid, I don't even know how to describe that, some amorphous trapezoid on the bottom. And then it's just almost connected to a larger shape at the top, but there's an area there that is not connected. There's one essential service that exists on that road, but it is disconnected from the rest, from the remaining POIs up on top.
What's
Accessibility boundary.
so this is the lines mean.
The lines mean that these areas are self-connected as you can roll around there with a wheelchair and expect to see sidewalks present.
They're the accessibility islands.
So what I should look at this is that if I want to go from one to the other, I'm not guaranteed to be able to roll
That's right.
from one to the other.
So just for the folks on Zoom, if you're looking between those areas that are shaded, you are not guaranteed to have sidewalks as connective features for connecting you. What's that?
The shapes that are on this map that don't have any color, what do they denote?
They denote areas that either have no sidewalks at all or have very disparate, disconnected sidewalk segments and don't lead you to any points of interest per the amenity list. And, we have 30 or so types of amenities that are included.
I wonder about, now that there's this wealth of data and there's these tools to visualize it, I wonder about this, building on this as a storytelling tool, because I feel like a lot of the failure points is the inability to tell the story about why these decisions are being made, about, okay, we're going to focus on this corridor and we're not focusing over here. I'm just curious, since we're talking AI, what's in your mind is the viability of being able to click on one of these cells or one of these larger colored zones and feed that data in and say, why is it this value? Why is it at a value of 5 rather than a value of 20? I don't know, on whatever scale, and have something come back and say, it's at a value of 5 because, there's this many points of interest and there's these 3 corners that don't have any curb cuts on them. And that, you know what I mean? Have something that is not just the data, but also the story, because I feel like that's
explain the result in text, kind of in response to your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
I don't know about text, but wait for Sai's presentation later today because there's a bit of a starting point for that.
Okay.
Not quite what you're saying, but.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. These are fantastic thoughts.